Final Fantasy VII Remake director praises The Last of Us Part 2 diversity. He says that The Last of Us Part 2 really delivered on its consideration for diversity. How? Almost all the characters in The Last of Us Part 2 are the same, are copy-paste. Everybody is bitter, everybody wants revenge, everybody wants to kill, everybody is sad, everybody is annoyed. They're all the same, they're not different. In the first part you saw Ellie being a little different, but that changed. She became just like the rest. And I already talked about this diversity by Naughty Dog, where you can clearly see from all their games they copy-paste the same personality over and over. They say, oh, this is a girl now, look how badass she is. But the combat is still the same as the male protagonist. Look at Uncharted The Last Legacy. They didn't even bother to change their animations, their combat, their everything. They didn't matter that they are girls. It was like you played Nathan Drake but with the skin of Chloe. And no, I don't care, and I never cared if a character likes puss or dick. You can create the main character with whatever sexual orientation you want. But at least try to give them a personality, try to give them a story. Don't be lazy. Don't copy-paste the main protagonist and just say that they are gay or a woman or whatever. And if you have a different sexual orientation, you should want that. You should want a story made especially for you. You should want games made especially for you. You should want characters made especially for you. Not a copy-paste from the characters we already know and now they are gay or whatever. Just change the protagonist, give him a different sexual orientation or a different race or a different gender, and that's all. That's not diversity. And I'm sorry to say this, but The Last of Us Part 1 was also a piece of crap. The only thing that made The Last of Us Part 1 interesting is that you expected something else from Part 2. At least I expected that. I expected Joel to become happier, more optimistic, more trusting. I expected him to bond more with Ellie and become the father that he never had the chance to be. And it was okay for him to die. But the writer chose the shittiest moment to do that. I never liked Joel in the first part. I mean, I understand what happened to him, but still, he was very annoying and he was very bitter for no reason many times. But that was okay, I understood why. But I also expected him to evolve, to become a better person, and for Ellie to help him. But yeah, it didn't happen. It was a full game about nothing. Nobody did anything. They just killed some random people and some people died. That's the whole game. By the end of the game, it didn't really matter if Abby or Ellie realized the mistakes that they'd done. It was already too late and they didn't do anything for us to care about them. Anyway, let's go back to the director of Final Fantasy VII. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, we built the original game using the latest technology, but we felt that it could not stop at the technical side, and we needed to update the story content being shown in line with modern sensibility. No, you didn't need to do that. That's the idea of a game. Even the name of the game says that. Final Fantasy. It's not the final reality. It's not about the modern day. That's the idea of the game. That's why everybody loved it. Because it was a game about fantasy. We wanted to experience a new world with new characters. And you say you used the latest technology. Well, your technology is shit. The combat was shit. The combat was so bad. And I understand that you didn't want to use the turn-based, but you also didn't want to use normal combat. And it was something in between and it really sucked. Sometimes you missed your abilities, your limit breakers, you didn't really need to apply any strategy, and you didn't really need any skill. Mostly you spammed a lot of stuff. You just waited for some abilities to be active and you spammed. If this is your latest technology, yeah, I will stick with the Final Fantasy VII original and play turn-based. Come on, it was really bad. Am I the only one who thinks that? The enemies were too easy, or they became overpowered. And some battles were so long and boring, of course, because like I said, you didn't really had a lot of strategy. Sure, you can use defend and they can counter and blah blah blah. That's the bare minimum. And it didn't really matter that much. Many times it was too many things happening at once, and it was annoying and boring. And yeah, why should you care about modern sensibility? If we care so much about modern sensibility, then how do we create tragic things? Awful things, evil characters? We cannot create that because somebody will get offended. When you try to write a story, if you are a good writer, you should only care about the story, not about people's sensibility. So what you're saying is that you don't care about the story? You don't actually want to make a good story? You just avoid triggering people. That's all? That's what you care about? If that's what you care about, then I'm pretty sure part 2 will be a big fail, because you will never know how to write a bad character. An evil one, I mean. You will not want to show some tragic stuff. You will care more about people's sensibility instead of writing a good story, instead of making a good and entertaining game. And in case you don't know, most of the movies and the jokes you know are not sensible. Look at the best stand-up comedy in the world. George Carlin, Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle. Not all of them and not all their comedy is edgy or controversial. But most of the jokes are, and those usually are the best ones. Even if you can argue that you love more Mr. Bean or Jerry Seinfeld. My point is that they cared about the jokes. Jerry Seinfeld or Mr. Bean didn't write their jokes that way because they didn't want to offend people, and Dave Chappelle and George Carlin didn't write their jokes just to offend people. Their main focus were the jokes. When you came to their show, they wanted to see you enjoy their show. They didn't stop during the show and say, "Are you offended? I'm sorry. I will never say that joke again. Let me make another joke that's not offensive, even if it's not funny. Anybody else is offended? Okay, I will make another joke. What if I talk about this? Oh, there's a guy who's still offended. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can somebody please make a list about the things that you find offensive? I don't want to offend anyone, no matter how unfunny I become." Yeah, that would be stupid. The next second that would happen, I will want my money back and I will leave that show. And I would avoid going to that comedian, because I'm going to the show to see comedy, not people not getting offended. That's the idea with Final Fantasy. I'm not paying for a game to not get offended. I'm paying for a game to be enjoyable, to be fun, to have a good story or fun gameplay. And let me tell you something. You may think that Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 sold a lot, and you may also think that Part 2 will sell a lot. But let me remind you that Final Fantasy VII, the original, was one of the most sold games in history. It's not anymore, but it was. And yes, Final Fantasy VII Remake sold a lot. But a lot of people, just like me, wanted to see the original with voice acting and better graphics. But even with all that love, even with the old fans and the new fans, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake was a failure, and I already sold my copy. Well, that's mostly because I saw that you made the DLC especially for the PlayStation 5, even if you know a lot of people can't get the PlayStation 5, or it's more expensive and they can't afford the PlayStation 5. And also, it was no reason to release it on the PlayStation 5, because the PlayStation 4 can also run it, and we already know that. So it was a fuck you to the fans. Just like I'm sure Part 2 will also be a bigger fuck you to the fans. The Final Fantasy VII Remake director says about The Last of Us Part 2 that it's a great game that sets a benchmark for the industry. Again, how? Don't get me wrong, I don't really hate The Last of Us Part 2, I just don't care about it, I don't want to play it, I don't want to buy it. A lot of people were forced to work overtime to make that game possible, and I'm pretty sure they didn't get a lot of money for that. Just the big bosses. The gameplay is nothing impressive. If you played any Uncharted game or The Last of Us Part 1, I think you will notice that there is not a big difference between the games. I mean the gameplay. So what did they do? You usually always hear the same story when a game with a male protagonist comes out. Oh, another angry white male who wants revenge. Well, this is what The Last of Us Part 2 was, you fucking idiots! But instead of a white male, it was Abby. Then it was Ellie. Wow, what a difference. I guess that's the American standard now. That's all you need to be a good writer. Just take the stories we already know. That was copy-paste over and over. But now we change it with a girl, or a different race, or a different sexual orientation. Like I said, I have nothing against making new protagonists with different lifestyles. But at least try to write them a good story, not the same copy-paste over and over. People are fed up with the American style movies because of the woke stuff. But I stopped watching the American movies over 10 years ago. And it wasn't because of the woke stuff, it was because it was clearly a copy-paste. Nobody had creativity. They didn't try to make a good story. And now they still don't know how to write a good story. They're just telling us it's something new because now it's a black person, or a transsexual, or a lesbian, or a bisexual, or he's gay. And that's all. Okay, fine, he's gay, so what's the story? That's all the story? Like I said, you don't really care about people's sexual orientation or race or any kind of real diversity. You don't know how to be creative, you don't know how to write a good story, so you try to fool people to buy it just because it's a different protagonist. I think we all deserve more. We all deserve better. For example, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII. For over 10 years, they are trying to remake the Final Fantasy VII game. Well, I actually think it's 20 years. Anyway, my point is that they didn't do anything because they didn't know what to do. Everybody expected to be a game that's at least the same level as the original. They probably tried over and over and over to write a good story because it's a remake and they didn't want to write the same story. They realized they're not that smart, or the people who are creative are not supported in writing the story they want. The directors don't really care, but they also know people will not like it. And instead of letting the creative people do their job or hiring somebody that can do it, they prefer to say that, oh, this game is about diversity, takes in consideration modern sensibility, and they think people will buy it. Well, you know who actually will buy it? The people who don't stay online all day and don't know about the crazy shit you say online. And they don't know you will destroy the games that they love. I know that because that's me. I didn't even own a PlayStation 1 and it was impossible for me to find original games. But I still found a way to buy Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 1 that I still have. And I don't regret buying that. But I regret buying Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's why I sold my copy. And yeah, it was mostly because of the DLC, because you made the DLC only for the PlayStation 5 and that annoyed me a lot. I still didn't really enjoy Final Fantasy VII Remake. It felt like another washed up AAA game. I hope that part 2 would be entertaining, but I'm pretty sure that will never happen. Let's read more to understand why. The article, from IGN of course, says that The Last of Us Part 2 was notable for its complicated relationship between two of its main characters, Dina and Ellie. It also touched on transgender issues in the course of its harrowing journey through the ruins of Seattle, blah blah blah. Yeah. I guess that's all it takes today to be a 10 out of 10. You can have a bad story, you can have bad gameplay, you can treat your employees like shit. But if you implement a story about transgender people, then it's a 10 out of 10 game. And this is why nobody takes IGN seriously. And for real now, what was so complicated between Ellie and Dina? Ellie wanted to go and take revenge. Dina wanted her to stay and live a normal life. At least try to rebuild a normal life. It's not that complicated. They just wanted different things, like any other relationship. And just like any other relationship, when two people insist on wanting two different things, that relationship will end badly. If IGN wasn't a virgin, and they had a girlfriend, they would know that. Oh my fucking god, IGN even says that The Last of Us one of the best games of 2020, ultimately winning IGN's People Choice Game of the Year of 2020. No, it didn't. If you read Wikipedia, and sure, Wikipedia is not always 100%, but Monster Hunter sold more games, Final Fantasy VII Remake sold more games, Infamous Second Son. Okay, let's just talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake and Ghost of Tsushima. Final Fantasy VII Remake sold better. And oh my god, Ghost of Tsushima sold even more, even if Ghost of Tsushima was released later. But somehow they insist on telling us that the game of the year is The Last of Us Part 2. Even if the game didn't sell that much compared to the other games. So how can it be the People's Choice Award if the sales say something else? Anyway, the idiot director from Final Fantasy VII Remake says, "I think that expressive diversity with LGBTQ plus inclusion is an important issue for everyone involved in making content, not just people making games." No, it's not. When you make content, your main focus is entertainment. You should be creative, you should make a good story, you should make a good game, a good movie, a good whatever. You just use the LGBTQ plus excuse so that people cannot say that it's a bad game. Because if they say that, then you say, oh, you don't like LGBTQ, that's why you don't like the game. No, I don't like the game because the game is bad. Because it's not creative, because the story is bad. Because you don't try to be creative. You just say that, oh, we have LGBTQ diversity. You should love the game. No, you should love the game if it's good. If it has a good story, if it has fun gameplay. And no matter what game or gameplay you make, there are people who will like it or don't like it. That doesn't mean it's a problem with them. But it can be a problem with you, and mainly with your sales. Because in the end, you make games and products in general to make money. That's your main focus. And we give you money for good entertainment and creativity. Anyway, let's finish this video. In the end, they talk about the honeybee in sequence when Cloud is dressed up and as a woman and does the huge dance number. Yeah, the director is so proud about this part. Like, people paid for the game to see this part. Like, nobody brought the game because they wanted to see the original. To see better graphics, to hear voice acting. I played the original. I didn't really like the original honey bee in part. It was kind of strange and I don't think anybody remembers that. Well, most of us didn't care for Midgar because the best parts of the game was when you go out of Midgar. But like I already said, let's think about it a little. Ghost of Tsushima sold more than Final Fantasy VII Remake. That should tell a lot to the director of Final Fantasy VII Remake. People were expecting this game for a long time, so many had many reasons to buy the game as soon as possible, just like I did. But even so, the game didn't sell as much as Ghost of Tsushima, for example. How? It's Final Fantasy VII Remake. So many people wanted this game for a long time. You may say that you sold a lot, but still, I think if you did a great job, then the sales will be double. But I don't think this is the time to see the big failure. I think Final Fantasy Part 2 will show how big the failure of Final Fantasy VII Remake is. Their only chance to succeed is for them to sell their games on PC and Xbox. Because I don't think their game will sell that well on the PlayStation 5. But of course you will have the fanboys and the people who buy every game that it comes out without searching for information about the game. But I'm pretty sure your sales number will be lower if you will do what I think you will do.